66 community screenings across the country in the last year and a half. It's won like 18 awards at film festivals. It's distributed on digital platforms like Amazon, Tubi, YouTube, and Google Play. There's educational distribution. And so people, and there are various organizations that are using this for their, to help educate their communities. And so uh, I share this with you because you all have, one of these, I'm presuming, that you can, make documentaries or like even scripted films. You can create video that affects people, that impacts people, that has a positive effect on people and their communities. And it's very accessible to all of us in a way that wasn't, 10, 15, 20 years ago, where we had to hire crews and pay for film and there were a lot of barriers to be able to actually getting something done and getting it out there. So I wanted to share that with you before I launch into DIY activist filmmaking and all the components to that. So with that, let me pull up my slides here. All right, can everybody see that okay? Yeah, okay, awesome. So DIY activist filmmaking, this is something that this is a course I created because people wanted to know how I made the film and how they could do it. So I put this course together. And so I already introduced myself, professional musician. I also teach conflict resolution for Antioch University. I have a master's in public administration, and I'm in a PhD program for transformative social change. So the activism part, the filmmaking part, the storytelling part are all different aspects of my life that have intersected. So another thing I want to share with you is I've had probably 6 different careers in my life, and it wasn't what I intended to do. So if you're here wondering, I don't know what I'm going to do, or if this is it, or if there's more, there's always more. There's always things that come up, and you're never like, there's always opportunities and possibilities. So, as I mentioned, Chatter was a feature film, a horror film that I did, which everything took place on Skype. So this was before Zoom, but when we were all using Skype, it was so, micro budget horror film. We used camcorders to simulate the webcams. We filmed it in 9 days. It won a bunch of awards. It got distributed. Like you can watch it. I know it's on Amazon and Tubi. But it was something that was an idea, an experiment that became a film, an actual film. In 2018, when the Me Too movement was happening, there were a lot of instances where mostly women were sharing their Me Too experiences online on, Facebook and Twitter. And at the time, there were a lot of men who were pushing back, who didn't understand, who, didn't have the awareness of what was happening. And so as I was interacting with these men, there were several women who asked me to write a book or teach a class or something to help inform men. And so I wrote and self-published a book that became a #1 release on Amazon. And as a result, I ended up doing a lot of interviews on news media, like local media and podcasts and things like that, which at the time, when I was working in conflict resolution, that kind of springboarded me into working with larger groups and organizations. And then finally, Reimagining Safety, which is the trailer that we just watched. Again, a film that I came out of a master's in public administration program. I filmed it on my iPhone. I had I'll get into the specifics later, but edited on my laptop, did all the things, 85, 90% of it I did myself. And then I hired, like composers and graphics people and things like that. Okay, so why DIY? Even as a musician back in the day when I was playing, studio time was very expensive. The digital platforms weren't as sophisticated as they are now. So it cost a lot of money to go into a recording studio. Um, Also, when you're recording albums, when you're making films, when you're writing books, and you have studios and publishers and things like that, that's other people that have input on what you're saying, the story you're telling, the story you want to tell, how you want it to come across. So with DIY, you maintain your creative control. It's faster because you're not waiting on people, you're not having to necessarily raise a lot of money, and it's direct. You can, with my film, with Reimagining Safety, I was able to put it all together and then get it distributed on self-distribution platforms that put it on Amazon, Tubi, YouTube, and Google Play. With the book that I wrote, it went directly onto Amazon. With Chatter, it was a similar thing. We went through a distributor at that time, but and then for you all, like you have access to TikTok, YouTube. There's a lot of different outlets where you can just film things and get it out there to whichever audience you want. And then my work. I like to think that my work is unique, informative, and it is all rooted in relationships. At the end of the day, what drives me is the desire and the passion for people to understand one another and to work together towards common goals. And so whether it's this film, even Chatter being a horror film, one of the consistent comments, from reviewers was that the relationship between the lead characters, the husband and wife, was really developed and really drew people in. So I break down projects into 4 stages. So there's the pre-production mode, the production mode, post-production, and distribution. And so pre-production is the planning stage, your story, what's it about? Um, what's the arc of the story, the arc of the characters? If we're talking film, who is going to be in it to play the characters? Where are you going to film? What kind of equipment are you going to use? And even in the pre-production plans, it's important to consider what your distribution plans are. Do you want this to end up in movie theaters? Do you want it to end up on TikTok? There are different considerations for things like that. And again, this is where the story begins and where you start, writing and putting the story together. In the production phase, which is when you're actually filming, so you're on set, you're filming, you're recording video, you're recording audio, you have the lighting, you have all the digital processes that are happening, and there's a story to that also. When I filmed Chatter, we did most of that. Most of it was filmed in the apartment that I was living in, and on the first day of filming, I had all the food. I put it in the fridge. It was what was going to feed the crew for the whole week, and the refrigerator stopped working. And so I immediately had to find like buckets and ice and things like that. So it's an element of the story when I love hearing about, listening and watching behind the scenes and making of, right? And things like that. So there are things that always come up that you have to figure out and deal with. And so with the Reimagining Safety, um, I knew that I wasn't going to hire a crew. I knew that I was going to film on my iPhone. I got, 2 little lights that I could use. I had my iPhone. I borrowed a lavalier mic, and I showed up basically with 2 little bags, and it was just me. And so when the people in the film came to the first screening, the reaction from all of them was, "You made that with what you showed up with?" So there's a story to it, right? So in the post-production, that's when you put it all together. So you filmed everything, you've recorded everything, and then you're going to edit. You're going to piece together all the elements. You're going to add sound effects, music, color correction, so that everything looks better and more balanced. And there's a story to that also. I had in the editing part, one of the things I had to figure out, because this was my first time doing a documentary, was I have 10 interviews. Everybody did at least an hour. Most of the interviews were like 2 and 3 hours. I'm like, how do I put all this together in a way that makes sense and is engaging? Like, how do I piece it together? And so I had to figure out, well, if this was a movie script, there would be the main characters, there'd be the supporting characters, and there'd be the people that come along to help move the story along. And so I made the decisions of who was who based on the information that was shared. There was also the element of I wanted this to be a very balanced, um, it was an academic project also. So I needed it to be reputable. There are people that share their lived experiences, but then I have a person that can back it up with statistics and academics and things like that. And so those were choices that I made as part of the story of how we put it together in post. And then the last part is the distribution, like what platform is your project going to be on? Because there are different considerations for that. There's also like the legal considerations, contracts for the people that you're interviewing. Clearances was something like I have, there's archival footage in my film. There's clips from TV shows. And when you're distributing on major platforms, these are things that you have to take into consideration, that you need to have a lawyer involved to have things cleared. Now, if you're doing things for like TikTok and Instagram, there are ways around that. It's not always a consideration. Music is something that gets flagged a lot. So I know there are libraries of music and things that you can do. But anyway, there's the distribution part, and there's the story to that. So for me, um, it was, I want as many people to see this film as possible. I could hold out for like HBO or Netflix or something like that. But at the end of the day, it was more important for me to be able to say, it's on all these platforms, just go watch it and share it. So that's the distribution part. So along the lines of story, it's not just the story, it's not just the script, it's not just the video that you film, right? The first part is, what is the story that you want to tell? What's important to you? Why do you want to tell it? What's interesting about it? What's your connection to it? For me, reimagining safety, um, while I don't have a specific direct connection to the carceral system and policing, growing up in Los Angeles and going to very diverse schools and having a very diverse group of friends, at a young age, I was very aware of the disparities, not just with policing, but how my Black friends were treated when we would go to the mall and things like that. So I was always aware of that. And then when I went to college and I was in music school, I was taking sociology classes because I was fascinated about society and why things are the way that they are. And so I was learning about systemic racism at the same time as the Rodney King beating and the LA riots. And there was the Rampart scandal with LAPD, with that particular station that was doing that had like gang officers and things like that. And so my connection to this is really about humanity and equity and people being taken care of. Um, and so, okay, so we have, what's the story you want to tell? Why do you want to tell it? Who is your intended audience? Who do you want to tell it to? Right? A lot of us as filmmakers, we like to think, yeah, it's for everybody. But really, when you're marketing and when I was editing, my goal was to be able to influence people to make changes, influence people to think outside the box of how we've been socialized about police and prisons, and thinking that this is our route to safety when it's not. So for me, my intended audience of the film um, was white liberals, to be honest. Um, in in the distribution and marketing process, I knew that it was very important to get social justice organizations, decriminalization organizations, folks like that, to see the film and give their approval and say, yes, like you know, we endorse this, because then it lets me know that, okay, the film it tells the story it needs to. And then as my intended audience would see it, what's been happening is, folks are like, oh, I didn't think of defund the police this way, or I didn't understand what abolition really meant, or I didn't understand how harmful the system was, and that there are actually alternatives that work. And then the last thing is, how do you want to leave people? And so for me, even with um, a heavy topic, I want to leave people with hope. I want to leave people with something new that's possible. And so that's how I approached it. So I'll get into the story part in a second. Um, but before that, so there are multiple stories, right? We were talking about, like, what's the story of the project? So that's why how the story came about, how the film came about, the story of me, the storyteller, like growing up in LA and having all these experiences and observations. Even going back to school is part of the story. The story of the making of, using a iPhone and a laptop and finding the people that were involved. And then what's the story once it's out? And that's been the film festivals and the community screenings and um, being with all of these amazing folks and organizations who are already doing the work that I didn't know was available before I started the film. So just a couple more slides and then we can get into more of a conversation. So in storytelling, we normally think of a three-act structure, act one, act two, act three. So, if we think of it in like a rom-com, for example, like act one is the inciting incident is, the two people meet, there's a spark there, they fall in love. Um, Plot point one, maybe they move in together, something like that. At some point during Act Two, something happens. There's a conflict. Um, they get upset by the plot point two. They break up, and then Act Three is them, getting reconnected, finding each other, realizing they still love each other, and then like that's the end of the film. There's also elements in horror films, like most projects, books, stories utilize a three-act structure. Because I wanted my film to um, take a certain trajectory where it identified the problem and left viewers with a new possibility. There is a structure for new possibility that I followed, and this is what I use in conflict resolution. And I, when there's an issue, when something's not working, we have to define what it is, right? If everything's working, like we're fine, there's no problem, right? But if something's not working, if there's harm being caused, it's important to define that. So in the case of Reimagining Safety, um, following the murder of George Floyd, uh, the system of policing causes harm. The prison system causes harm, perpetuates violence. So with the first part of the film defines what the problem is. It's police, prisons, um, and the experts in the film talk about the history of policing, talk about the statistics on uh, incarceration and how being incarcerated takes away, it removes possibilities for people in their lives. It removes opportunity. And so that's the first part. And then what's the impact? Like, if we don't change anything, what happens if we don't change anything? And that is, things will continue, things will get worse. We continue to incarcerate more and more people every year. Uh, uh, Police, if you look at, uh, there's a website called Mapping Police Violence. The police, since 2020, last year they murdered the most people in the last 15 years last year. There are cop cities that are being built all over the country. There's over 80 of them. There's like 84, right? So the impact is we're going to keep doing this. It's going to get worse. Um, and so the third part then is, well, what's the new possibility? What can replace this system that's already in place? And so that's when the people in the film are talking about abolition and restorative justice and having people have resources, having communities be focused on care rather than punishment. And so that's where those ideas get introduced. And then how do we get there? And then that's where in the film, the people are talking about, yeah, knowing your neighbors is a way to get there. Having like phone trees where, if something happens, we have a community, we have people we can call, people we can message that will come help. Um, Having plans for, if somebody's having a mental health crisis, who to call for that that's trained to support that. And so that's the structure that I followed with my film. And I think this last part is, and then the tools that I used, and this is the last one is, like I said, use my iPhone lights. I had, a sound set up with a lavalier and a zoom. And uh, that's that for this part. So I'd love to check in. Does anybody have any questions, any thoughts you'd like to share? Um, I'm kind of happy to open that up.
Yes, I actually had something to say. Well, first of all, thank you for your presentation. I thought it was very eye-opening how someone can make such an impactful film that touches the lives of many um, with not a lot of material. So I find that really motivating, and so I am actually the president of my school's film club,
Hmm.
and it's been pretty difficult for me, and especially over the years when I took over, to create to find people who are committed to the project. So, what's your advice to finding a group of people and finding a community that will support your idea help help you out until distribution?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's always, um, whether it's funding or like you said, just having a community that's supportive, it's really, for me, it's been outreach. It's been what I did early on was I would find Instagram accounts of, Black Lives Matter or decarcerate, like decarcerate Memphis, there's decarcerate Kansas City, like I would NAACP, ACLU. But I would go and search for organizations that were aligned with what the story of my film was. And then I would follow them and I would comment on things and I would send them a message introducing myself and letting them know, hey, Matthew Solomon, I directed this film. I'd love to share it with you. And sometimes folks don't respond. Sometimes they do. Eventually I would get an email and I would send them a link and send like a synopsis of the film. I would share who was interviewed. Any information that somebody can look at and be like, oh, that's interesting, or oh, I know that person, or anything like that. So it's a process, and in doing that, that's how I started initially having screenings, the community screenings. I would just reach out to people and eventually somebody would say yes. And then we would do the screening. And then I would share about the screening on social media and be like, oh, I'm in Memphis. We're about to, screen at Rhodes College with, these three organizations. And I would share pictures or video. Um, I would get testimonials from like the leadership that I could share, whether it's mostly I got written testimonials, but video testimonials are really awesome. And so I started with outreach. They would then tell people there's an activist in New Jersey who's been incredibly supportive and has connected me to a lot of different folks. And so it really is uh, building a network, reaching out, building community from a place of, I want to contribute to you and what you're doing. Um, so that's how I've been doing it. And then along the way, people then just started contacting me, but I still do outreach also. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
And I also just want to connect these pieces because that work is also the work of advocacy and organizing. As we talk about, like advocacy does not happen in a vacuum, like you need your community around you. And especially with the work that y'all are doing, like thinking about who in your community that are connected to you that like care about your cause and like doing outreach and connecting with them and building that community so that you're not in it alone and that you're creating these relationships. So just it's all connected.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is, in the even it's in even there's a quote in the film. Audre Lorde said, "Without community, there's no liberation." And so really, even though a big part of the story is I filmed this, I edited it, I still had people around me that would watch edits of it. One of my best friends, when it came time, when there was money that actually needed to be spent, one of my best friends from seventh grade, who I shared this with, was like, I want to help you. This is really important. Let me know how I can help. And she was somebody that was able to provide funds for like the audio mix and graphics and things like that. And so, um, I think a lot of us have a tendency. I know I have a tendency to be like, oh, I'm just going to do it all myself, but we really can't. At a certain point, we really do need each other, and community is really important. And with all you being in this cohort together, it's a great way to support each other, not just here, but even afterwards. Anybody else have a question or anything?
Hi, yeah, I'd like to say something. So, hi, I'm Ade
Hi there.
Peguero. I learned about this Zoom opportunity through Venice Arts. So that's how I learned about this, and I wanted to say that I think it's very interesting how you incorporated your experience with conflict resolution into your filmmaking process, because I'm also trained in conflict resolution
Mm.
and come from a background of community organizing, and that's something that I have definitely try to incorporate into the art making I do. So hearing from you your process and approach to this is really interesting and also very inspiring. As there are projects I want to do, and I sometimes wonder like how do I navigate creating art in a way that I feel is true to the messages that I'm trying to share, while also making it accessible and like I feel like filmmaking for a long time to me has felt very like um inaccessible just because I'm like, how does distribution, how does like making it accessible, how does the production work? I've learned a little more about that, but I think the fact that this documentary came from also like a project for your master's was interesting. So I'm curious to hear more about how you maybe balanced what you were learning from your master's in public administration with the message and importance and like your outreach for this project.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that question. Um, so and I mean, this is great. Like, because we do conflict resolution, um, you know, we get to be neutral at times when it may not be easy to be neutral. So for me, if I was making this film outside of academia, outside of, conflict resolution, it would have been really easy to just get a bunch of activists talking about abolition, and that would have been that. But I understand, and that in order to reach people, in order to have people look at things differently, change people's minds, you kind of have to under you have to we have to understand where they're at and where they're coming from. And so, you know in conflict resolution and in the work that I do with that, people really desire to feel heard, understood, and valued. And so when people are arguing, when there's a conflict, when something happens, one of the quickest ways to get past all the like the interference is to acknowledge their point of view, acknowledge what they're experiencing. It's like, yeah, I know that that's frustrating. I know that that's scary. I get that that's scary. And when they feel heard, the defense and the resistance comes down, and then we can actually have a conversation. And so the way that the film is structured, it's not just, it doesn't come out like, F the police, screw you if you don't understand, like this is what we need to do, right? This is this system that we've been, because of TV and film and the way we've been raised, a lot of us think this is our only access to safety. This is the only thing that provides safety. But yet, here are the other things that actually do provide safety. And by the way, this thing that we've been socialized inside of, here are the statistics and the lived experiences that demonstrate that it actually works against it. Oh, and by the way, almost half the city's budget goes into this, and the budget keeps increasing, because there was the narrative that, oh, cities got defunded, police got defunded, and that's why we have crime. But if you look at it, um, the police departments were not defunded, and in fact, their budgets have increased. So understanding where other people are coming from, what their concerns are, what their fears are, really shaped how I approached like presenting the information in the film, and how I structured. And there's even, there's a former LAPD officer in the second part that talks about what the training was like and how she went in, because she's like, I care about people. I want to make a difference. She's like, I grew up watching Law and Order. Like I wanted to be a detective and all of that. But then once she was in the academy and saw what the training was, and then once she got out on the street, and then she worked in internal affairs where, there were supposed to be investigations of police that were, you know, committing harmful things, and seeing how a lot of that got dismissed and swept under the rug. Like that's why she wanted to speak out. And so the conflict resolution part, the academic part, uh, was what led me to interview the 10 different people that I did, incorporating their perspectives. And so there are activists, well, soon to be former district attorney of Los Angeles County, a USC law professor. There's two sociologists in the film, one of whom has worked with police departments for 40 years. Gina Viola is in the film. She ran for mayor in 2022 on an abolitionist platform. And so she was going door to door talking to people about alternatives to policing. And I was fascinated to know like what people were saying to her. So all of that is, what was incorporated out of conflict resolution, and understanding that it's important to reach people like where they're at, so that you can kind of speak to their concerns and open them up hopefully to other possibilities.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just think it's really interesting, and I think I really appreciate your perspective and approach of like you care about people being taken care of, so that's how
Yeah.
you approach your work. Um, and yeah, I think too, how you express it is also that like it's not so much about like telling a person like this is what they should think, but it's like let's build upon your experience and I'll provide you with further information so you can think about it. So yeah, thank you so much
Yeah. Yeah.
for
Thank you. Thank you. It one thing that's funny is there's uh, a police officer's wife that I know, who was really mad about the film. Was like, why did you even do this? Why are you even doing this? And my response was, because I care about people. And so I appreciate you mentioning that, because at the core, that's what drove me to do this.
I have a question that's kind of similar to what you guys have been talking about,
Yeah.
but how do you make sure that you get your film into the right hands, like people that might disagree with your message? Because I'm sure that like this film is super interesting to a bunch of people that are already interested in defunding the police or different abolitionist movements. But how do you make sure that there are people like the people that like don't agree with your message and kind of have like where there's like room to kind of change people's minds, how do you make sure that the film gets into their hands?
That's a great question. Um, so part of my strategy initially, so when I wrote the Me Too book, there was a lot of positive response, a lot of support, and then there were the haters, and the people that would kind of come after me on social media and all of that. And knowing that that's a thing, especially now, like it's only gotten worse over the last, number of years. Um, one of the initial elements of my strategy was to get the film to people that I knew were aligned, that were, allied in the fight. And like I said earlier, to get their approval and uh, you know, their stamp of approval, like that sort of thing. In the process of that, there are then the folks who come to the screening who are aligned, who've been like, how do I talk to my mom or my brother or my cousin or my coworkers who now have access to the film they are sharing it that way. And there are a couple of people who have shared with me that like this one person who I've known, she's like, yeah, I was afraid of defund the police. I didn't know what it meant. I understand it now. And I just sent it to my mom, you know? And so it really is, and this is, completely grassroots, like word of mouth. Mainstream media doesn't want to talk about, like they've literally said, we don't touch anything that has anything to do with defund the police, even though there's so much more to the film than just that, but that's what they are concerned about, latch onto. So it really has been word of mouth. And it's like there's I don't know if you all are familiar with Jewish Voice for Peace, JVP. They have uh, a graphic, a diagram of how to have conversations with groups of people. And in the diagram, there's this group that you're never going to reach them no matter what you do. And then over here are the folks that they're completely aligned, they're on board, like you don't even have to have the conversation. And then there's the middle group that, like, those are the folks that, as you expand your circle or through people that's how you reach those folks. So that's been my strategy, and it seems to be uh, working in that direction. But it is like um, it's been interesting because there have been cops that have shown up at screenings, and for the most part, uh, active police will say, yeah, some of that's true, but they'll try and pick apart like minute details. Former cops tend to be like, yeah, it's like that, and I can't believe you got a former officer, to say all the things that she did. There was one screening though in Newark, New Jersey, where they have an active violence prevention program with citizens who go out, and instead of the police, they go out and they de-escalate and they provide services and things like that. But there are a couple of officers that oversee it. Those officers love the film and they were like, more of us need to see this. So, it depends. You never know 100% where somebody's at, but if you can, and that's another reason why there's a variety of perspectives in the film too, because the legal part might speak to somebody, or the activist part, or the former police part. Um, so I don't know. Does that answer your question? Or
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of osmosis, basically. But the strategy initially, like I said, was sort of to protect myself by first being with the people that I knew were aligned before it kind of got broader. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else?
I actually had another question.
Yeah.
When you say you were interviewing a lot of people, that sparked an idea. How do you make sure that the things that people are saying are true to what they believe and they're
Mhm.
not just saying things in order to align with your view and your film? Because you say that in conflict resolution, you were forced to look at both parties. And I think my question is actually two. One, how do you make sure that what people are saying is true to their beliefs and it like isn't influenced by what you want to portray? And how do you make sure that you have a wide variety of opinions in order to either challenge the view you originally had or perpetuate it even more?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. I thought
Thank
you were
you.
going to ask, how do I know that it's what they're saying is true? Which that was a thing that came up where, I had to go and like make sure the statistics or some of the stuff that they said
Yeah,
was true.
yeah, that's where you have like the statistics people. You say
Yeah.
fact check their experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. With how do I know that what they're saying is true to them? I mean, so I didn't have an agenda other than I wanted to speak to experts on that I knew were aligned at least with alternatives to policing. And then it just went from there. So I was just really curious about their perspectives and their experiences and things like that. And so which also comes from conflict resolution, is being curious. Like I didn't know how the film was going to develop and turn out. And in fact, like every single interview, I left the interview just so moved and blown away by how openly everybody shared. And I learned a ton. Somebody had or mentioned before about using art and advocacy. And what I learned was so many people in abolition are artists, slam poets, painters, filmmakers, writers, musicians, you know. And I didn't know going into it that abolition is really about love, and it's about caring for each other. Like that's something that came out of the film. So I my approach was not like this is my goal with the film. I want to tell this story. It's what is your story and what's important to you and what do you want people to know? And I was referred to a lot of those folks, or like for instance, Alex Vitale, who's in the film, he wrote a book called End of Policing. He's a sociologist, and I was citing his work in my master's program. So, these are people that I knew had been uh like in this work for a long time. Um, I feel like there was another part of your question. I wanted.
So I think you made sense when you were answering the how do I make sure that what people are saying is correct in focusing on experts in that field and focusing on what the person wants to say.
Mhm.
And the other part of my question was how do you create how do you find people that have the different perspectives in what you are creating in order to either challenge your view or perpetuate your view?
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it was informed by my coursework because I knew I wanted an activist, somebody affiliated with Black Lives Matter or an organization like that. Um, in my master's program, there was a TED talk that I watched by he was a former prosecutor named Adam Foss from the Bay Area, and he did a TED talk on the role of the prosecutor in recommending sentencing and how he had uh, this experience where instead of recommending that somebody be incarcerated, he came up with this restorative process that actually, with that person, 10 years later, like they went to school, they were thriving in business, it changed their life. And so I tried to get him, I couldn't find him. But then it was like, okay, I want to talk to a prosecutor, uh, who at least has a somewhat of a similar mindset. So that led me to like looking for prosecutors. Alex Vitale, I had been citing his work. So I knew I wanted to interview him. So I reached out to him. And then he connected me to Dr. Jody Armour, who's a USC law professor. Um, and so that happened. And then Jody Armour connected me to DA Gascon. And so some of it was intended, some of it was like, oh, you should talk to this person. It's like, oh, okay. Um, so there was that part. Gina Viola, who ran for mayor, I knew I wanted to talk to her because I had been following her. And I thought the political part would be really interesting because she would know directly what people were saying as she was going door to door. Um, I wanted to find a cop or a former cop because I wanted that perspective, but not most of the documentaries I've seen on the subject that interview police they're still standing for, no, we still need police, we need more police. We just need to, like, it's about the training. And so my coursework and my research and all of that leads me to, it's not really the training, it's the system. And so um, I wanted to find an officer that was more aligned with that. So that was that. There's a Dr. L. Jones is in the film. She's a professor in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I connected with her because she actually co-authored a 200-page report that the city authorized in Halifax, a 200-page report on what it means to defund the police, where that money goes, who's involved in the decision making. So she's like literally wrote wrote a book, and so I wanted to talk to her, and so she said yes, and so that's how she came about. And then Nikki Black, who is a sociologist, she also is an anti-racism teacher. I'm in a community with her. She's been a teacher of mine, like we're friends. I knew I wanted her to be in the film because she's also an award-winning slam poet. Like, so I knew that she would bring a lot to the film. Um, Not just information, but in entertaining ways that really connects with audiences.
And sorry, could you repeat her name?
Yeah, Nikki, Nikki, Black, Blak.
Okay, thank you. Because
Yeah,
yeah, when you said slam poetry, I don't know, but like I perked up. I was like, oh, okay, so um, that's really interesting. How she
yeah.
incorporates those two aspects.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's on Instagram as Nikki Black. She's very accessible. Um, yeah, so it was all of that. It was, originally I thought, okay, maybe I'll interview 4 or 5 people, and then it just kind of expanded. And then there was a point where, oh, and I wanted a mental health professional also. That was something that was really important. So Jose Gutierrez, who is a social worker and a licensed therapist, who works with incarcerated youth, he's in the film. And so I was connected to him through one of my professors. So that's how all of that came about.
Amazing. I'm so glad we have so many questions. This has been so great, and that was awesome questions from the audience. So thank you guys for participating so much. Before we go, I wanted to bring us to some of our calls to action, because we like to try to leave a lot of the SVL kids, this, but we try to leave with some kind of more like tangible thought about what the next step is after talking about what we talked about today and having such a great conversation. And for today, I'm going to invite you to think about, I have a prompt for you. And I'm going to invite you to either think about or journal about this or brainstorm on this as you start thinking about maybe the first steps of your next creative project, or just to get you thinking about issues that you're passionate about. So I'm going to send this in the chat. But basically, this question is just getting you thinking about an aspect of your own community or a community that you are really fond of or that you're aware of, that you want to bring to light. So I wrote, what are the stories, voices, or challenges that you would highlight about this community? What do you think other people misunderstand about this community? I think is a big one, because such an important part of like making films and creating art about a community that you're passionate about is thinking about what other people don't understand about it. And then thinking about some personal experiences that make you care about this issue. So if any combination of those questions inspire you, then I definitely invite you to start thinking about that, either whether you write about it or talk about it with your family or your friends. So I leave you with that. And our other call to action for today, this is more specific to if you're in one of our Student Voices Leaders programs. But as we approach our next cohort sessions that are related to filmmaking, we invite you to maybe take some videos on your own, just on your phone, of anything that you see that kind of inspires you. It could be the grass outside or something on your desk or anything about your everyday life. But if you have a few videos to bring to our next session, then that will help you with some of the technical skills that we're going to build. And with that, we have a few minutes left, so I don't know if we have any other burning questions, but thank you all so much for being here. This was amazing.
Thank you so much, Hera. Thank you so much, Matthew. I hate that Zoom silent. It's like, yay, but it's silent. It's all silent. So thank you both so much for guiding this session today. We will have a couple public sessions in the spring for those of you who are joining us from outside the organization. So we hope that you will join us, one of whom is a dear friend and an amazing artivist, who will be joining us in February. And for Student Voices Leaders, we can't wait to see you for cohorts for YAC. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you tomorrow for finance. And Matthew, thank you so much for taking time in your schedule to join us today. And Hera, thank you so much for your guidance and leadership.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Awesome. All right, you all have a great rest of your night.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.